When the heavy steel gate clicked shut behind him, Mikhail Prusik found himself locked inside the cage with an enormous African lion. But Mikhail wasn't afraid, because the enclosure stood right in his backyard, and this predator was the pet he had raised with his own hands. That's why what happened next was truly horrifying and something Mikhail could never have imagined, nor did two others whose stories we'll cover today, all united by a passion for wild animals, and who eventually paid the ultimate price when that obsession turned fatal. But first, as always, viewer discretion is advised. 34-year-old Mikhail Prusik had always been known for his deep love of animals, and in December 2010, followers of his Facebook page got their first glimpse of his beloved companions. Except these weren't kittens, but real lions, calmly curled up beside him in bed. Originally from the Czech Republic, Mikhail spent part of his life living at a farmhouse in the Slovakian town of Zevocin. Almost daily, he proudly shared photos of his animals, both young and fully grown tigers and lions, wandering the backyard as if it were their natural home. Yet the main stars of his page were always the same: a male lion, Fufi, and a lioness, Whiny. Mikhail had lovingly raised them since they were cubs, documenting every step of their growth, feeding routines, and playful interactions. And both Fufi and Whiny indeed appeared to behave like oversized domestic cats under his touch. But in 2015, Mikhail decided to move back home to the Czech Republic, settling into his father's house in the small village of Zdechov. For reasons unknown, he brought only Fufi with him, leaving the rest of his menagerie in Slovakia. But slowing down was never part of Mikhail's plan. As he continued to raise Fufi, now fully grown, neighbors soon saw him building large, homemade enclosures in the backyard. And a year later, in 2016, Mikhail delighted his followers with another sweet photo of Fufi, only this time beside a new companion, a little lioness named Lyuwinka, brought into his life with the hope of breeding a new generation. Mikhail was overjoyed and continued to share photos from their new home, affectionately calling Fufi, Fufichek, and Lyuwinka, my little princess. But it was around this time that the first serious problems began. Local officials repeatedly denied Mikhail the permits needed to keep exotic animals, voicing concerns over the lion's housing conditions, which were entirely homemade and far from meeting any safety or legal standards. Eventually, authorities cited Mikhail multiple times for illegal breeding and keeping dangerous animals without registration. And it wasn't just officials who were alarmed, but his neighbors as well. In 2018, Mikhail took 2-year-old Lyuwinka for a walk on a local trail when a cyclist suddenly collided with her. This time, authorities responded again, but Mikhail refused them access to his property, as he always had. And since the lioness hadn't injured anyone, and no abuse was evident, officials were powerless to intervene, ultimately classifying this case as a traffic accident. Still, none of this seemed to shake Mikhail's passion. He continued caring for the animals with the same devotion, determined to raise a new generation of lions on Czech soil. But to local officials and residents, he remained a ticking time bomb. And on March 5th, 2019, that time tragically ran out. That morning, Mikhail's father was checking the outdoor surveillance cameras on their property when something strange caught his eye. The image showed Mikhail lying motionless inside the cage with Fufi, now 9 years old. Panicked, he ran to the enclosure, and when he got close enough to see clearly, he was faced with a true nightmare: Mikhail's torn and bloodied body. He immediately called the police, but by the time officers arrived, they couldn't even enter the cage, since Fufi, weighing nearly 200 kilograms, remained aggressive and refused to let anyone approach the body. Eventually, the officers were forced to shoot Fufi, calling it absolutely necessary to secure access to the scene. But then came a second, devastating blow. The officers also killed Lyuwinka, who had been calm, caged in a separate enclosure, and showed no signs of aggression, citing a potential safety risk. Ultimately, this tragic accident was officially ruled as an animal attack, and since the cage had been locked from the inside, it was assumed Mikhail had gone in alone, most likely for routine feeding or cleaning, when Fufi suddenly turned on him. Still, not everyone believed this version of events, because 2 years earlier, in April 2017, Mikhail had posted a desperate plea on his Facebook. Today, I learned from a citizen of Zdechov that the Zetin office, the veterinary report, and the Zdechov municipal office have agreed to demolish the fence surrounding my domesticated lion Fufik, who has not harmed anyone. They want to harm him and me and everyone who loves him with heavy machinery, and if Fufik defends himself, they are supposed to shoot him. All of this without a court proceeding, without the participation of the landowner, me, and without any final court judgment. I ask for help for anyone who cares about Fufik. Please share. Even the mayor of Zdechov, Tomas Kokorik, made a chilling public statement right after the tragedy, saying coldly, "This incident will perhaps finally help to resolve this long-term problem." Even I briefly believed in a conspiracy, with tears in my eyes scrolling through photo after photo of what appeared to be two tame, gentle lions from whom everyone seemed so desperate to get rid of. But then came a single detail that changed everything. Back in March 2012, Mikal had been rushed to a hospital in Trnava, Slovakia, with massive lacerations across his arms and legs. In an interview with local media, he explained that as soon as he had stepped into the cage with the then 2-year-old Fufi, the lion had immediately pounced on him. Yet even then, he didn't blame his pet. "It was my fault that the lion attacked me. He was behaving naturally. I made a professional mistake. Like every morning, I went in to feed them, but this time I wore a coat that smelled like my dog's." And for how he survived, Mikal said it was thanks to Winnie, the same lioness he had left in Slovakia, who had chased Fufi away and saved him. After emergency surgery, Mikal gave one last quote in that interview, a line that now feels unbearably heartbreaking. "I know that all the saints must have been standing beside me. The lion could have eaten me completely. Fortunately, I'm here, and I can't wait to meet my lion couple." This story shook me to the core, but more than anything, it's a brutal reminder that no matter how gentle they seem, wild animals can never truly be tamed. And the next case proves that, perhaps in an even more horrific way, because this time it wasn't just one predator involved, but an entire pack. On July 17, 2006, Crystal Piovizun was waiting for her mother to arrive for breakfast. It was a quiet summer morning in Salem Township, Pennsylvania, and sharing that meal together was something of a family tradition. 50-year-old Sandra Piovizun never missed it. She was punctual, dependable, especially when it came to her family. However, that day, Sandra never showed up. At first, Crystal assumed her mother had simply lost track of time, but as the minutes ticked by, concern turned to dread. So she got in her car and drove the familiar back roads to Sandra's property, hoping it was all just a misunderstanding. Yet what she found instead was something truly shocking. The gate to the enclosure behind the house was slightly ajar. Inside the pen were 8 massive wolf dogs, pacing, growling, and circling something in the dirt. It only took a moment for Crystal to realize what she was looking at, her mother's torn, bloodied, and partially devoured body. But how did it come to this? The thing is, Sandra Piovizun was known for her quiet life, and yet one defining passion, her wolf dogs. For nearly 10 years, she had been breeding and raising the hybrids in a fenced enclosure on her rural property. The pen was large, about 12 by 45 meters, and surrounded by reinforced electrified fencing topped with a mesh. At first, she'd started with only a few animals, then bred several litters herself, with some of them born right there in that backyard. Despite being part domestic dog, hybrids, especially high-content ones, were far from typical pets. Weighing nearly 55 kilograms, they often lack the genetic traits that make dogs predictable. They're less socialized, more anxious, and far more reactive under stress. Furthermore, wolf dogs exhibit strong pack instincts, have a high prey drive, and are notoriously difficult to contain or train, often requiring constant supervision. At the same time, none of Sandra's animals were registered with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, as required by law for exotic or hybrid animals. Instead, she found a loophole and licensed them as ordinary dogs using basic municipal tags, skirting the very regulations meant to keep such creatures in check. And that wasn't the only red flag. Just a year before the accident, one of Sandra's hybrids had attacked and killed another member of the pack. In another incident, a visiting friend was bitten. And although no formal complaint was ever filed, neighbors also frequently raised concerns. They spoke of hearing disturbing sounds at night, of the stench of roadkill Sandra reportedly used to feed the animals, and of the deeply unsettling feeling they got walking past her property. But Sandra wouldn't hear it. She referred to the wolf dogs as her children and believed they gave her something she couldn't find elsewhere: unqualified love. Yet on July 17, 2006, that belief came back to haunt her in the worst way imaginable. That morning, Sandra had entered the enclosure likely to feed the animals, clean their space, or check on their behavior. But what happened next was what responders later described as coordinated pack behavior, an aggressive group response likely triggered by a single individual. Experts believe Sandra may have tried to break up a fight, or perhaps simply entered during a shift in the pack's hierarchy. Either way, once the first bite landed, the rest followed. And eventually, all of the predators inside the pen turned on her, lunging with their teeth and nearly tearing her apart from every direction. The autopsy, later performed by renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht, confirmed the cause of death as exsanguation, massive blood loss from soft tissue injuries consistent with a coordinated pack attack. Yet by the time police and humane officers arrived, they found not only Sandra's lifeless body, but the very same animals, still agitated and aggressive. Therefore, all 8 hybrids were euthanized on the spot. Meanwhile, the 9th wolf dog, which Sandra had kept inside the house, was spared and later transferred to a local animal shelter. Following the tragedy, Pennsylvania tightened restrictions on wolf hybrid ownership, closing the loopholes that had allowed such animals to end up in the hands of untrained private citizens. And yet, Sandra's daughter, Crystal, defended her mother fiercely. She knew what she was doing, Crystal said. If she didn't, she would have been dead the first day she had them. Tragically, the final case also involves an experienced caretaker. But that didn't save them either, because this time, the predator was something even larger. And when it turned, it did so right in front of terrified children. 37-year-old Kelly Ann Walls and her husband, Michael, weren't just typical animal lovers. For nearly a decade, the couple had built what neighbors described as a menagerie perched atop a quiet hill in Ross Township, Pennsylvania. And indeed, the Walls' backyard was home to some of the world's most dangerous predators: an African lion, a jaguar, a tiger, a leopard, 2 servals, and a cougar. But among this exotic collection, their most cherished creature was a 160-kilogram American black bear named Teddy. The Wallses had raised Teddy from cubhood. They had watched him grow from a fuzzy ball of fur into a massive adult bear. And according to friends and neighbors, the animal had never once shown signs of aggression. For 9 years, he lived in a 4.5 by 4.5 meter steel and concrete cage on the property. And despite his size and strength, Kelly treated him like one of the family. The Wallses had long insisted that their animals were well cared for and deeply loved. Michael Walls, a licensed exotic pet dealer, had held permits for years to keep and sell wild animals under his business, World of Reptiles, Inc. And although those permits had lapsed in June 2008, state officials referred to it merely as a technicality, not something serious enough to have a warranted confiscation, since their private menagerie had undergone numerous inspections before without raising alarm. Therefore, no one expected that something bad would happen on October 4th, 2009, when Kelly went to clean Teddy's cage. In such moments, she would usually distract the bear by tossing dog food to one side of the enclosure, then enter from the opposite side to perform cleaning duties. It was a regular routine, but the family's close friend and neighbor, Scott Castone, would later describe it with one chilling phrase. She'd done it 1,000 times, and on 1,001, something happened. From his house about a football field away, the Castone and Walls children were the first to notice the horror. In a flash, Teddy charged across the cage and mauled Kelly with a devastating force, tackling her to the ground. The terrified children began screaming for help. Hearing the commotion, Scott Castone immediately ran toward the Walls property with his handgun. As he approached, Teddy was no longer hunched over Kelly, but walking out of the cage. The man made a split-second decision, raised the gun, and fired. He got off of her to come out to me, he later recalled. I did what anyone would do. It was pretty much self-defense. In an instant, Teddy, the black bear that had been part of the Walls family for nearly 10 years, collapsed just outside the enclosure. Paramedics arrived shortly after, but unfortunately there was nothing they could do to save Kelly. She had already died from catastrophic injuries sustained during the attack. In the days that followed, the Pennsylvania Game Commission launched an investigation. Officials confirmed that the bear was housed in a cage without a 2-section layout, a design that allows caretakers to safely isolate the animal while performing maintenance. This, in turn, violated a basic principle of exotic animal husbandry. Why this woman chose to go in the same area that the bear was in is beyond me, said Tim Conway, a supervisor with the commission. It's a fatal mistake. These things are not tame animals. They're wild animals. At the same time, neighbors who mourned Kelly's loss also admitted they had always feared this day would come. But no one imagined it would end so brutally for the entire family and for the animal itself. After the attack, Teddy was buried nearby on the grounds of what was once the Hilltop Menagerie. The remaining animals at the Walls property, including the mountain lion and tiger, were quietly removed over the following weeks, and the family continued on, left to live with the weight of the tragedy. In the pursuit of the exotic, people often forget one simple truth. No matter how tame or gentle they may seem, wild animals are ruled by instinct. And that instinct never disappears, not even after a lifetime in captivity. The stories we've shared today are heartbreaking proof of that, because the truth is pretty simple. Wild animals belong in the wild. And had that simple boundary been respected, perhaps none of these tragedies would have ever happened. Neither the deaths of the innocent animals, nor the horrifying fates of their owners. Now let me ask you, have you ever dreamed of owning an exotic animal? Which one? And after hearing these stories, do you still want to? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more shocking, real-life stories, ones that just might make you think twice before bringing a 300-kilogram predator into your backyard. And maybe settle for a house cat instead.